Hello everyone, I am Aviral Vats, a general practitioner in NHS Scotland and a psychology enthusiast. Let us talk about the psychological and economic forces at play in the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. Hopefully, this will help us understand why this conflict persists and how governments exploit their citizens' psychology and promote their inhuman policies and decisions blatantly. All this might help us understand how it affects us emotionally and mentally. Since October 7, 2023, the conflict between Israel and Palestine has escalated many-fold, dramatically. The violence has resulted in significant loss of life and destruction. It's a distressing situation that impacts us deeply, even from a distance. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to immediately halt its military assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah and called the humanitarian situation disastrous. Israel, on the other hand, calls the World Court's order outrageous, morally repugnant and disgusting, and says the accusations that it's committing genocide in Gaza are false. Now let us uncover a bit how Israel might be exploiting the biases and heuristics to push its agenda. The first of the biases that help them push their agenda through psychological exploitation is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs. Politicians and media can exploit this very effectively. The Israel state focuses on the threat of Hamas to justify their own military actions, ignoring the fact that their own actions are genocidal, as termed by the ICJ, or the International Court of Justice. Israel banks on the confirmation bias of its citizens who support the government in this. Research on media representation of the Israel-Palestine conflict shows significant bias in how events are reported, influencing public perception. For example, US media has been found to report more on Israeli casualties than on Palestinian ones, thereby affecting public sympathy and support. The second tool, another tool the government and the media uses, is framing effect. The way information is presented, that is the frame, can significantly affect decisions and judgments. For example, Israeli actions have been framed as defensive operations to protect civilians from terrorist attacks. This is an effective bias. Analysis of political speeches from Israeli and other leaders reveal consistent framing techniques that present their actions as justified and necessary while demonizing the other side. The third up in this is negativity bias. Negative information impacts our judgment more than positive information. For example, Israeli leaders have been focusing on Hamas violence, rejecting peace efforts as insincere. This fuels pessimism and thus that there is lesser chance of resolving the conflict. Fourth in this is availability heuristic. Now this bias makes us overestimate the likelihood of events that are vivid, recent, or even emotionally charged. For example, Israeli leaders and media have frequently highlighted Hamas attacks of October the 7th to keep those memories vivid. No one condones those attacks, but Israel and the media would try utilizing this availability heuristic to keep hammering their narrative. However, we see this bias slowly fading away with time and rationality, and we see that people are seeing through this. Fifth is representative heuristic. People judge the probability of events by how well they match the preconceived stereotypes. For example, Israeli rhetoric often portrays Palestinians as terrorists. This reinforces the stereotypes and perceptions and helps the Israeli army benefit or justify their actions. The sixth in these tools is that they use often is the in-group and the out-group bias. This is important because this bias involves favoring members of one's own group over those of another group. Politicians often use this to rally support for framing the conflict as us versus them. Example is Israeli leaders frame their actions as necessary for survival and security of Jewish state, tapping into the historical traumas and fears of anti-Semitism. However, it is clear since October 7th, 2023 that the Israeli state has some other agenda than just being protective of its own group. Historical narratives taught to Israeli children and youth emphasize reinforcing the in-group loyalty and out-group hostility. Now, how these politicians use these heuristics and biases? Well, heuristics are mental shortcuts that system one of our thinking processes, and it uses to quickly solve problems and make judgments. Now, these heuristics help in making fast decisions but can lead to systematic errors or biases. Now, biases are those systematic patterns of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment, which often result from the reliance on heuristics. System 2 of our thinking is slow, deliberate, and an analytical system. It is generally less prone to biases because it involves more careful and logical thinking. It is not entirely immune, though, to the attacks of System 1. System 2 can sometimes even be co-opted to rationalize or justify the conclusions that System 1 has drawn. Moreover, when System 2 is tired, distracted, or under cognitive load, it may fail to correct the errors of System 1. In practice, System 2 often endorses or even rationalizes the intuitive judgments or decisions made by System 1, which heuristics and biases can easily influence. So System 2 can override System 1 when necessary, but this requires effort and cognitive resources, which are not always there. So please be mindful of these processes in our minds when coming to decision making in a conflict of such a huge scale as in between Israel and Palestine. It is not just the biases and heuristics that are driving the leaders of Israel, US, UK, and the likes, but it is also the economic incentives. In these economic incentives, sadly, the human cost is often ignored as other group has already been dehumanized. So, Israel's economic interests that push this war on Palestine include, first of all, is control over resources. Israel's occupation of the West Bank allows control over valuable resources like water, agriculture, land, and minerals. Settlement expansion, that's the second key interest. The construction and expansion of settlements provide economic opportunities and create employment for their own people. Third economic interest is the defense industry. Israel's military-industrial complex benefits from ongoing conflict, driving demand for defense products. And for countries like US and the UK, the four key economic interests include, there are many others, but four key are arms sales. This is key because the US and UK are major arms exporters to Israel, thus benefiting from ongoing conflict. The United States provides significant military aid to Israel, which not only supports Israel's defense industry, but also aligns Israel's policies with US geopolitical interests. This economic dependency can incentivize Israel to maintain a hardline stance to ensure continued support. US foreign aid to Israel, totaling billions of dollars, is often conditional on maintaining certain security policies. The second interest which US and countries like UK has is the strategic alliance. Supporting Israel helps US and UK in maintaining so-called strategic partnership in the Middle East. Third in this series of interest is the domestic lobbying. Pro-Israel lobbies, which are so strong in the US and the UK, they advocate for continued military aid. The fourth key economic interest is so-called regional stability. US and UK project Israel as a stabilizing force in the Middle East, thereby protecting their economic interests such as access to oil and gas. Now, in all this, let us quickly talk about one's own mental health. Even being far away from the conflict zone, witnessing all this and the ongoing violence can lead to feelings of sadness, helplessness, anger, thus impacting our mental health. This occurs through what is called in psychology as learned helplessness. continuous exposure to conflict can lead to a sense of helplessness. This is characterized by perceived lack of control. The individuals believe that they have no control over the outcomes of their actions. The individual becomes passive. Passivity sets in and fails to take actions, even when there are opportunities to improve the situation. Learned helplessness is often associated with symptoms of depression and anxiety, as the individuals feel unable to change the circumstances. I'm sure many people are feeling anxious and even depressed. The individual expects negative outcomes and believes that any effort to change the situation will be ineffective. All this can lead to disengagement. Lastly, excessive exposure to suffering can lead to what we call emotional overload and compassion fatigue. Balancing empathy with self-care and setting appropriate boundaries is essential to prevent emotional exhaustion and maintain mental health. Your emotional health is of prime importance even if you are away from the conflict. Now, how can one help oneself so that one can continue supporting the cause of justice and humanity? Let us quickly discuss 5 key coping strategies for a continuous constructive engagement. First up is understanding the psychological and economic factors as discussed in the video. This can help us manage our emotional responses and engage constructively. Secondly, let us encourage critical thinking about education, media literacy, and factual knowledge sharing. This helps individuals engage the system too, processing and mitigate sudden reactionary thought processes. This video is aimed at helping with critical thinking in the same light. Thirdly, let us promote psychological resilience by providing support groups and programs. This helps manage emotional responses and reduce feelings of helplessness. Practices like mindfulness can also help. Fourthly, if possible, facilitate constructive dialogue by creating spaces or forums for open dialogue. This should allow individuals to discuss their views and also, if possible, share their feelings. The admins should use conflict resolution techniques to guide discussions in these forums more productively. Fifth and lastly, provide opportunities for empowering action by providing clear steps for individuals to make a difference through, for example, advocacy, education, financial support, or humanitarian efforts. Highlight successful examples of such actions. Let us think of what one can do in one's capacity. How can one influence own government, MP, or local leader to take one's voice forward? So in conclusion, the Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex and emotionally charged situation. By understanding cognitive biases, systems 1 and 2 thinking, and economic factors, we can gain a nuanced perspective. Recognizing the psychological impact of helplessness can guide us towards resilience and constructive engagement. Through education, critical thinking, and supportive communities, we can navigate these complexities and contribute to more informed and empathetic discourse. Friends, thank you very much for watching, and I hope this has provided some clarity and comfort in these troubling times. Take care.